Avatar: The Last Airbender is a series that needs absolutely no introduction. Whether you've watched it 50 times, seen it once, or have just caught some of the waves it's made in pop culture, chances are you've heard of this series. The fact that you know what the show is, however, is no accident. The Last Airbender is widely regarded as one of the best works in all of fiction. It has this ability to create condensed stories that are interesting even if you've never seen another episode of the show, while at the same time having an overarching story meant for people who like to go deeper into the media they watch.
He's right.
The story of The Last Airbender is no joke either. The kids who the show is meant for are provided with a well-thought-out adventure, and many of the adults who either came back to the show later in life or have just found it are surprised to find that the show also has some very deep themes that they might have missed if they watched it when they were a kid. I will forever be an Avatar glazer. It has its problems, but never have I seen another show as thought out as The Last Airbender is. In the years since the show's finale, there have been many attempts to recreate the level of popularity and acclaim that the original series achieved. The franchise has since added a brand new sequel, a live-action movie, and a live-action Netflix series, with more seasons expected to come. I believe all of these adaptations have failed in achieving the level of specialty that The Last Airbender had. All of them have very glaring issues, some more than others, but before we talk about the issues with the adaptations, we need to understand what all of these other installments are trying to live up to. What exactly about The Last Airbender makes it so special? The main thing that I think pulls people into the series at first has to be the power system of bending. It's a very unique magic system, but the aspect of the show that I think makes people stick around without actually realizing it is the world building. The way The Last Airbender makes the world feel so large is so important when making a story that takes place all over the world. And instead of just showing characters going to new places and expanding on locations that way, they also have characters mention names of places we don't see until way later in the show. For example, Season 1, Episode 6 is the first time Ba Sing Se is mentioned.
You once laid siege to it for 600 days, but it would not yield to you. Ah, the great city of Ba Sing Se.
It's mentioned many more times after that, and we don't even get to see the inside of the city until Season 2, Episode 14. It's small details like that which make Ba Sing Se feel like a large, important city in the Avatar universe, and even more important, makes the world as a whole feel large. You can name all the locations in the world and show people a map of it all you want, but gradually exploring different locations along with the characters makes it feel like you, the viewer, are living in this world with them. On top of this, the way bending is integrated into daily life in The Last Airbender makes bending feel natural within the world. A mistake that a lot of shows with magic or power systems make is only showing characters' abilities like just be used for fighting. Avatar has so many different use cases for bending, and just to name a few, the walls and delivery system of Omashu, Aang using airbending to fly, and in my opinion the most important of all, the multitude of characters who just use their bending to goof off. As well as bending being integrated into the fabric of the Avatar world, the show does one more very important thing. In the first episode, they use multiple lines of dialogue to make sure the viewer knows that bending is not magic.
It's not magic, it's water bending.
Magic trick, do it again.
Not magic, air bending.
Bending is a trait many of the people in the Avatar universe have, and the coolest thing about it is that you can't just bend with your mind. Well, not until later bad decisions were made. Each element has a different move set needed to be able to bend them respectively, which the creators of the show cleverly derived from real-world martial arts. All of this together gives the feeling that the world is huge and that bending has been around for a long time. The other main thing that makes The Last Airbender so good is the characters. By the end of the show, you look around and not a single loose end is left. Characters are so dynamic and changing that it's scary. Look at Katara. She starts out weak, insecure, and grieving over the death of her mother, and by the end of the show, she's a waterbending badass who's confident in herself and realizes revenge for her mother isn't the best course of action. Same goes for Sokka. He goes from being sexist and not so smart to being a mature leader and strategist. Aang goes from being a goofy kid just wanting to mess around to being a fully realized avatar who saves the world. This type of characterization is seen in literally every main or relevant side character in the show. The founding aspects of world building and characterization come together with a million other great things I could point out to create one of the best pieces of fiction in history. But that isn't what this video is about. It's about the unfortunate issues with the adaptations that were added to the Avatar franchise after the original show. So without further ado, let's get into the better of the three adaptations, the Netflix live-action Avatar. Now when I say better, I don't mean good, but before I start on the issues with this adaptation, I'd like to say a few things I actually really like about it. In terms of appearance, this is exactly what I wanted from a live-action Avatar. The bending effects look stunning, the costume and set design team absolutely killed it on this series, every character looks like they truly are from their respective nation, and places like the Northern Water Tribe or Amashu look amazing, large, and mystical. Finally, the directors did an amazing job on casting. Each character looks and sounds similar to the originals, and the acting is phenomenal even with some of the poor writing decisions. Now, onto the issues, of which there are many. Despite trying to be a one-for-one copy of The Last Airbender, the show, for some reason, decides to change multiple things that are very important to the story and characters. The first of these is Sokka's sexism. In the early episodes of the show, Sokka is a little bit sexist. The entire point of this feature of his character is to show that it was wrong. Like, before he gets to Kyoshi Island, he would make the occasional snide remark. He would say something like, "Women make clothes and men do all the fighting." Every time he makes a remark like this, though, he's immediately reprimanded. When he gets to Kyoshi Island and gets taken down by the Kyoshi warriors, he can't believe that girls were able to take him down, and he spends the entire episode learning why that way of thinking is wrong. Netflix ignores the deeper meaning for Sokka's sexism and instead decides to outright remove this part of his character entirely in order to seem progressive. This makes Sokka's entire character for the entire season just a goofball, and it makes him stale and unchanging. Another very important thing that they change is the Agni Kai between Zuko and his father. This scene is one of the most integral parts to Zuko's issue with his self-worth and essentially his entire arc. And what does the show decide to do with this very important scene? You guessed it, change it drastically for no reason. The show decides that instead of Zuko refusing to fight his father, he instead does fight and almost wins. Zuko's entire arc was the fact that deep down he was a kind soul and his banishment led him down a path of evil and bitterness. By changing this about his character, he loses a lot of the characterization that he would have had originally. And on top of that, he literally has the chance to win the Agni Kai right then and there, but stops short. So this means the big bad endgame boss of the entire show is almost defeated by his son, a 13-year-old boy. What a great change from Netflix. They also seem to care way more about the fight scenes in the show than the actual story. Characters will literally talk directly to the viewer in expo dump about what type of character they are and what's going on in the world. Every point of the show just feels like it's rushing to get to the next fight scene so you don't hop on TikTok. Look at the scene of Aang telling you how much he likes to goof around.
He said, "I need to remember who I am." But I know who I am. I like to play airball and eat banana cakes and goof off with my friends. That's who I am.
The issue here is that we never once see Aang actually goofing around. Aang's arc and the point of the entire series is that he has to learn how to mature in order to become the Avatar. Like in the original series, he spends like 4 or 5 episodes just like going from island to island, like riding animals and just messing around until eventually Avatar Roku tells him that he's got until the end of the summer to beat the Fire Lord, and then it really sets things into motion. This change doesn't ruin Aang's arc entirely, but it seriously degrades its quality. Instead of just taking a few scenes to actually show the viewer what type of people each character are, they would much rather hit you with word vomit from one of the characters and then zoom off to the next part where you get to watch the fire go whoosh out of the scarred guy's hands. Watching the progress of the show's development was a roller coaster. The announcement that the original creators leaving had me really nervous. Then the first trailer dropped and I started to have hope again. I was actually kind of excited clicking on that first episode on release day. But I promise you, it only took me like 10 minutes to realize that this is the result you get when you take creative control out of the original creators' hands. The reason why the original creators left this project was due to creative differences, and it's clear that this is what they were talking about. Netflix couldn't handle a show actually being story-driven for once, instead of every show's budget being all VFX. It's really disappointing when something hyped up this much just ends up being kind of mid. But I promise this one is nothing compared to the other 2 adaptations that have come out of the Avatar franchise. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the abomination that is The Last Airbender movie from 2010.
My name is Ong.
But if you haven't, The Last Airbender is a live-action remake of the first season of the original cartoon. And honestly, I don't even know if you could call it a remake, because they do nothing right. Nothing highlights the fact that the producers gave 0 shits about the source material which this movie is based off of, better than the fact that the movie cannot even pronounce the names of so many characters.
My name is Iro. You found the Avatar.
But Sokka and I can be with you as long as you need.
Then Prince Zuko was sentenced to an Agni Ki duel.
Like, seriously, this is crazy. Like, how do you... what? Like, in the opening credits for this movie, I heard Avatar and Aang, and I knew this was going to be a bumpy ride.
The movie could have been as bad as it is right now, and if they had just called him Aang once!
Somehow, with a big producer like M. Night Shyamalan producing, a $150 million budget, and I'm sure the many writers that were working on this movie, they can't pronounce a single character's name right. Shyamalan says in an interview that this was on purpose, but like there's just no way. This movie takes the Netflix route and decides to change so many things that do not whatsoever need to be changed. And these changes are so stupid it makes you question how this version of the Avatar world is even the way it is. For example, firebenders can't create their own fire. They reserve this ability for only the highest level of firebenders. And the only one who is able to do it in this movie is Uncle Iroh. This immediately creates so many problems that this movie either has to fix with extremely stupid solutions or just outright ignore. In every scene where a firebender is, firebending, there now conveniently has to be a pit of fire around, just burning. This genuinely makes no sense, especially in the water tribe. Like, what do you do as a firebender if a waterbender just splashes your fire source? You just kind of stand there and you go, oh, well, shit, I'm dead. Like, that's it. Like, what? How did the Fire Nation even take over the world in this very weakened state? All of these problems are created just because the movie wanted to be different. Another major issue is the characters feel like lifeless husks compared to who they are in the original.
Will you go penguin sledding with me?
You can tell by that evil look in his eye.
I ran away from home. We got in a storm. We were forced under the water of the ocean.
Oh, I see.
It wasn't very smart. I was just upset.
The characters of Avatar are something you cannot afford to mess up. They're one of Avatar's core components, and mess them up this movie does. Every time Katara talks, she just expo dumps, and it's way worse than the Netflix one. Like, that's all, she's just an expo machine, that's all she is. She has none of the fiery passion, none of the caring, sometimes motherly cadence about her, and it's the same with nearly every other character. Okay, so the characters are bad, but what about the story? Surely all this expo dumping has to at least make the story interesting, right? Wrong. This movie is paced so weirdly. The first half of this movie moves through the story so fast and then abruptly stops for the other half of the movie to spend the rest of the duration in the Northern Water Tribe. I literally got whiplash from this movie's pacing. Characters literally feel like they're teleporting between locations, because they kind of are. And in the movie's rush to get through 10 hours of content in 50 minutes, so many important characterization moments and story beats are skipped. Some episodes aren't all that relevant to the story, sure, but episodes that introduce characters extremely important to the story later aren't even put into this movie. King Boomy, Jet, Jong, Suki, and Avatar Roku are all completely non-existent. This movie literally feels like that AI-generated Willy Wonka event that was put on last year, and it does no service to the fans Avatar already had. It also makes zero sense to new viewers, like when Sokka gets to the Northern Water Tribe, meets Princess Yue, and they are literally just a couple from then on. There is no time for a developing relationship due to all of this content being crammed into such a short amount of time. Fight scenes are another one of the majorly clowned on parts of this movie, and for good reason. How did Shyamalan look at the snappy, punchy fight scenes from the original and turn it into, yeah, it takes 6 guys to throw one rock very slowly, and yeah, Aang has to do Naruto ninjutsu hand signs in order to throw some wind at somebody. Everything special is ruined. The bending, the story, the characters. There are only 2 things I can confidently say that this movie does kind of right, and that's the VFX, like cities and most of the bending, and Zuko, minus the whole can't make fire from nothing thing. There are so many other miscellaneous issues that I couldn't even fit into a main topic, so I'm just gonna list them here rapid fire. Why do Appa and Momo look like they're monsters from where the wild things are? Sokka and Katara just go with Aang instantly after meeting him. They act like friends who have known each other for years 5 minutes after they meet. Why does the blue spirit have weird long hair? The cast is whitewashed. Iroh feels like a sleazy Fire Nation soldier and has none of the traits of an old wise man like he's supposed to. Aang says you get airbender tattoos by meditating for a long time, and Fire Nation soldiers act like they're all drunk and make no attempts to attack Aang, especially in this scene. I'm sure there's more issues that I've missed, but living up to the original series aside, this is genuinely one of the worst movies I've ever had the displeasure of having to sit through. It took me like 3 different sessions to fully stomach it, and while you'd think that this is the one adaptation out of the 3 on this list that I dislike the most, it's not. So last but not least, let's talk about The Legend of Korra. Now before you go and yell at me in the comments about how much worse the live action movie is compared to Korra, just hear me out. I do believe content-wise, The Last Airbender movie is worse than The Legend of Korra by a long shot. But the thing that makes Korra worse is the fact that it completely ruins the once-in-a-lifetime series that was the original Last Airbender. There is so much to say about this series. This section of the video will probably be half the runtime, that's how bad this series is. Like I did for the Netflix adaptation, I'll start by giving Korra due process and telling you what I do like about this series. First of all, the art direction is amazing. The style of the show feels simultaneously like its own distinct thing compared to its predecessor style, and also a direct upgrade and natural evolution to the original style. I really like how accurate the show is when it comes to how an avatar would handle and interact with an industrial revolution type environment in a big city.
I'm the Avatar.
Oh, I am well aware of who you are, and your Avatar title might impress some people, but not me.
The world building is expanded upon nicely where it can be, continuing the trend of benders interacting with their environment, utilizing bending. I like the Zahir arc, and I really like Tenzin as a short-tempered air nomad trying to save his entire culture.
Don't bring my mother into this!
And J.K. Simmons fills this role perfectly. And finally, the action sequences continue the trend from the original of being very well choreographed and thought out, with the added bonus that now the punches and impacts feel very punchy. The combination of voice acting and sound design makes me feel like I'm the one getting hit by an earth pillar. Now that I've sung the praises of the series, let's get into the issues. Starting with one of the most major ones it has, the characters. Never when watching the original show did I think, I really hope we get a sequel to the show where all the characters feel forced together and don't change whatsoever, because that is exactly what the show does. Not only do they directly try to copy the gang model of the previous show, they even fail to do that correctly. Each character goes through zero change throughout the show, and they are always the exact same except for Korra in some instances. If I asked you to describe all the characters from The Last Airbender in one word, I feel like you'd have a hard time picking just one. Sokka might be funny, smart, and protective. Katara might be motherly, passionate, and hopeful. But in The Legend of Korra, it is just way too easy to describe characters with one word. And in most cases, you can really only come up with one. Korra's a hothead, Mako's slick, Bolin's a goofball. I hope it isn't a surprise to say that almost all of your main characters being one note is actually not a good idea. And especially for a direct sequel to a show that had such good characterization. Another thing about The Legend of Korra copying Aang's gang model is that they all feel so forced together. In The Last Airbender, whenever a new character is added to Aang's gang, it feels very natural. Aang needs an earthbending teacher, he has to seek out Toph. Aang needs a firebending teacher, Zuko comes to him. Toph wanted absolutely nothing to do with Aang at first. In the episode where they're trying to recruit her to join them on their journey, she screams for security to get him to go away.
Not my problem. Now get out of here, or I'll call the guards. Guards! Guards, help!
Then just as Aang is about to leave with everyone, she ends up coming along, not because she wants to teach Aang, but because she wants to get out of her strict household and go see the world. The allegiance to the other members of the group is something she builds up over time. There's an episode an entire season after she's added to the group, with one of the main conflicts being about her relationship with Katara. Trust is built over time, which is a theme that is completely non-existent in The Legend of Korra. Korra just happens to stumble her way into the Fire Ferret's room. And I don't want to hear, oh, they were pro-bending teammates though, because not only is pro-bending an extremely stupid sport, but also it is so unlikely, Avatar or not, that the Fire Ferrets would not only need a third teammate due to one of the other teammates leaving, but would also accept the brand new to pro-bending Korra. Like seriously, they don't have an understudy or a bench warmer? And don't even get me started on how Asami is added. She literally just hits Mako with her car, and they're going on a date by the end of the night. Every character meets each other by pure chance, and this forcing together of them feels completely unnatural and lazy. Many people bring up the argument that when talking about The Legend of Korra, it's unfair to compare it to The Last Airbender because it's its own series. But I think that's ridiculous because ignoring the fact that this show at its core is a direct sequel, everywhere you look it's either trying to copy the original or throw callbacks directly in your face so you the viewer are like, oh my god, it's tough. I'll ignore all the blatant terrible writing choices because she called Korra Twinkle Toes. For most of Korra's team avatar, they just make direct clones of Aang's team avatar. Pabu is literally just Momo. Naga is literally just Appa, and worst of all, Bolin, who is just a less funny Sokka clone that gets no character development, and on the off chance that he is about to, he just gets sidelined for jokes that I quite literally have never laughed at. And as for the callbacks, like seeing Katara or Toph in their old age, is that they kind of work to distract me, at least from the overall issues. The most interested I was in the show was whenever a scene with one of the characters from The Last Airbender came on, and I got to see what each character I knew and loved had been up to in the 80 years since the ending of the original. I understand it's impossible to avoid callbacks in a direct sequel like The Legend of Korra is, but when it's the most interesting part of your show, it proves one thing. The viewer is more attached to the old story than the current one. The new characters are so bland and unchanging, the viewer can't help but have their interest piqued when they finally get a glimpse of the original well-written characters. On the train of ruining everything good about the Avatar universe, let's talk about how The Legend of Korra ruins bending. Now luckily the main components of each bending type are safe here. I'm talking about earthbenders just throwing a rock, firebenders making simple fire, you get the idea. but the subtypes of bending in literally all 4 elements the show completely butchers. In The Last Airbender, the show gets very creative with the way it portrays its power system. Almost every fight scene has new creative moves, and it feels like such a natural way that humans would be using this type of power. I want you to imagine that you suddenly got the ability to waterbend. In a fight, would you continuously throw little water balloon-sized water balls at people for every move? Absolutely not. You'd come up with creative ways to take advantage of your new power. Like, I don't know, make a big water bubble, freeze everything in it, unfreeze yourself only, and chain down your opponent to a grate below you. The Last Airbender allows its characters to be creative and resourceful, and also trust that the viewer is a creative, logical thinker that can make thought-out inferences. I remember the first time I watched the series all the way through, I thought to myself in the first couple episodes, hey, humans are 70% water, right? Doesn't that mean that with waterbending, naturally you could bend a person? And in season 3, my little theory I made up in my brain was paid off. Of course that's a natural conclusion to make when you see a power like waterbending, and the same thing happens with Toph's metal bending. The logical aspect of these subtypes aren't what I'd say makes them the most special. What I believe makes these subtypes special though is that in the original at least, they have limitations. Powers with limitations make for some of the most creative fight scenes I've ever seen in media. Like for example, and you might not know anything about this series, but just stick with me here. In Hunter x Hunter, the power system in that show allows anyone to boost the power level of their ability by creating however many limitations for it they can think of. The more difficult the limitation there is to get around, the more of a power boost they receive. There's a guy in Hunter x Hunter who has one of the coolest powers I've seen in recent years in any piece of media. Basically what it is he can steal other people's abilities for good. But he has to, first, see the person's ability with his own eyes, ask the ability user a question about it, and be answered. The user must touch the handprint on the book that he carries, and all of this must be done within an hour. On top of this, there are even more limitations he has to deal with while he's fighting too. This is an Avatar video, so I won't get into them right now, but these limitations make for some of the most interesting combat due to the very nature of the rules they go by. With the right limitations, it is extremely hard, or sometimes impossible, for a writer or animator to create a fight scene that bores a viewer. Going back to the sub-bending types from The Last Airbender, we see this demonstrated perfectly. Metal bending, save for one scene, which I believe was a mistake on the show's part, can only be done with Toph's physical contact to the metal which he is bending. Blood bending can only be used when a waterbender is 1, already quite strong, and 2, at their most powerful during a full moon. Lightning generation in the same way can only be performed by the highest level of firebenders. There were only 3 people in the entirety of The Last Airbender that could generate lightning, and they were Ozai, Azula, and Iroh. The Legend of Korra takes this great power system and story choices, and not only smashes each and every one of them, but adds a little more fuel to the dumpster fire on top of that. So let's just start with earthbending. Literally everyone and their mother not only knows how to metal bend now, but they can all do it without direct contact with the metal. Don't get me wrong, I think Kuvira being able to force choke people like Darth Vader is extremely cool, but it's the fact that they are going back on a rule that they set up in the previous series. Even more braindead was the decision of creating platinum.
I'm afraid you won't be able to metal bend that wall, Chief Beifong. It's solid platinum.
I know exactly how this went down in the writer's room. They gave everyone the ability to metal bend because that's how they thought they would show Toph's technique spreading and create the idea that it's been a long time since the events of The Last Airbender. Then a few episodes later, they needed robots. How does The Legend of Korra go about making robots without a material that can't be bent under one of the 4 elements? Well, by just literally creating the new metal, of course. Nothing describes how little the events of the show were planned for better than this. The Legend of Korra creates a world-building element by giving everyone metal bending and immediately isn't prepared for the ramifications that decision creates. Moving on, let's talk about firebending and airbending. These two are pretty short, which is why I've condensed them into the same part of the video. Airbending receives 2 new subtypes in this show. One is stupid and one I actually kind of like. The stupid one is spiritual projection. It doesn't make any sense. In what situation would air ever be associated with being able to make a magical apparition of your body that you are able to see through and talk to people out of? I don't care if the ultra spiritual Jinora is the only one that's able to do it. This has nothing to do with air and just really feels like a leap in terms of how Avatar works. It just feels too magical. The other subtype is flight, and can I just say this is perfectly introduced. Flight is so hard to do that there is practically only one known person that was able to achieve this, and even then people have their doubts that he was actually able to do it.
Why didn't you ever tell us you can fly?
I wasn't sure I could. Only one other airbender in history had the ability.
How'd you figure out how to do it?
I found true freedom. I am no longer bound to this earth by worldly desires.
On top of this, flight is a very natural conclusion to make when you think of airbending, just like with blood bending and metal bending. Credit where credit is due, this is actually good writing from the Korra team. Now my only issue with firebending subtypes is the same with metal bending. They gave too many people the ability to lightning bend. I know at the start of the video I said I liked the world building that it brought on, but that's strictly because it shows how benders are interacting with the world and their environment using bending, not because all of these people can lightning bend now. Lightning bending, again, was reserved for literally 3 people in all of the original series, and they were shown to be the most powerful of all firebenders. And finally, last and certainly least in terms of good writing, we have waterbending. Waterbending is my favorite element by far, and this show completely screws up every aspect of it. So let's just start with how it messes up bloodbending. The Legend of Korra at the very least keeps up the idea that only a few waterbenders can actually do this. But the limitation that they mess up is the whole can only be done during a full moon thing. The 2 brothers Turlock and Amon and their father are apparently privy to a special technique of bloodbending where they can bloodbend in every instance instead of a full moon. It would already be one thing if it was just that they could bloodbend all the time, but why every time except the full moon? Wouldn't the full moon only work to increase the power of the bloodbending? This is just the show trying to be different and create a plot point out of nothing, and once again goes back on the limitation that they set up in a previous series. The stupidest thing about this whole bloodbending debacle isn't even just this. It's the moment where Turlock tells of psychic bloodbending, and when I heard this and saw this on screen in Turlock's flashback, that's the moment I lost all hope for this show.
He was a prodigy, mastering my father's psychic bloodbending technique by the time he was 14.
The fact that bending requires special movements is a part of what makes it so special. It helps to make it feel like a weapon that you can learn to use instead of just an OP superpower you're born with. Katara is so trash at the start of The Last Airbender, and we get to see her learn moves from the waterbending scroll and Master Paku. This decision leads to so many questions about the very core of bending itself. If bloodbending on its own is such a hard bending type to master, and people can do it psychically, then wouldn't these psychic bloodbenders naturally be able to bend regular water psychically? Is it possible to learn how to bend other elements with your mind? And if any of these questions I just posed are true, it literally ruins everything we've learned about bending as a whole up until now. Like seriously, what were these writers thinking? The other sub-bending type of waterbending is a new addition that leads perfectly into what I want to talk about next, and it's spirit bending. From the very first time this bending type is used, questions are raised. Isn't air the spiritual element? Can all waterbenders do this? And if so, why didn't we see or even hear of it in all of The Last Airbender? I can tell you why. The creators of the show didn't put nearly enough thought into any part of it as they should have. And this is most obvious in my next and easily the worst thing Legend of Korra did. I fear my brain might give out on me if I talk about what The Legend of Korra does with the spirits in Season 2 and some of Season 3. But I guess I'll start with what makes Avatar spirits special in the first place. People become intrigued in a story when they want to learn more about it, or in other words, the story creates mystery. In The Last Airbender, the spirits are absolutely shrouded in mystery. Aang goes off to the spirit world, and it looks a little like our world, but it's obvious something's off. Weird things happen, like a monkey-looking guy tells him to follow a glowing orb, then a tree branch disintegrates under his feet. It's very clear that something's off here. He then goes to talk to Ko the Face Stealer, who will steal his face if he shows any emotion. All of the elements that work together to create this scene have one thing in common. They all operate under rules we cannot understand as humans. It creates a sense of mystery about the spirits as a whole that make the Avatar world feel mystical yet familiar. And enter The Legend of Korra. In Season 2, we see our first spirit, and it looks off. The show decides that spirits are now just going to be your regular run-of-the-mill monsters. This is such an upsetting change to see and breaks the continuity of the universe itself. We never saw spirits like this in the previous series, and also now there are light and dark spirits. Any evil spirits we saw before didn't have this purple glow around them, and the only way they could become good again was by fixing whatever made them upset in the first place, not some stupid spirit bending. But whatever, that's the only bad thing they did to spirits, right? Right? The Legend of Korra then decides it needs to explain where the Avatar came from in the first place. And this story breaks absolutely everything about the original series. This backstory the writers came up with is easily the single most idiotic decision I've seen in recent years. If you haven't seen it, I'll give you a quick rundown of what this is. The story takes place 10,000 years ago, and the world is split up into 2 main areas. They are the Spirit Wilds and the Lion Turtle Cities. All humans live on these Lion Turtle Cities, and our protagonist of this backstory resides on the Fire Lion Turtle. The Lion Turtle can bestow the power of their respective element upon the humans that live on them as needed. We see as a few of the inhabitants of this lion turtle city receive fire because they need to go out into the spirit wilds to hunt for food. Juan agrees to go with this hunter group who needs manpower in order to steal the power of fire for himself. And when he does so, he's caught and banished. He argues that he should be able to keep the power of fire or he won't be able to protect himself out in the spirit wilds, and the lion turtle agrees to this. He sets out into the forest, unsure of his future. We can skip all the stuff of him meeting the spirits and befriending them, taking refuge in the spirit oasis, yada yada yada. He ends up stumbling across the two most powerful spirits, the spirits of light and chaos, Rava and Vaatu. He incorrectly assumes Rava is attacking Vaatu and severs their connection, letting darkness into the world. He then attempts to make up for this mistake by traveling to all the other lion turtle cities with Rava in tow and collecting each type of bending in order to defeat Vaatu. In their final fight, Rava merges with Juan to give him the power he needs to defeat Vaatu. He imprisons him in a tree between the two spirit portals, and the first avatar is born, wielding all 4 elements. When Juan dies, Rava tells him that she will be with him for all of his lifetimes, aka reincarnations, and this gives birth to the Avatar cycle. This would be a great backstory for the Avatar if it was written by a fanfic writer who is still in high school. This story quite literally only works if you put no deeper thought into how it affects the already established story from The Last Airbender. Let's first talk about how this affects bending itself. In The Last Airbender, we are told that humanity learned how to bend from natural places. The original Earthbenders were the Badger Moles, the original Airbenders were the Sky Bison, so on and so forth. But this new backstory completely contradicts that information. Another contradiction comes when in The Last Airbender, we are told that the Avatar state is the combination of all the past avatars focusing their energy into the current avatar. The Legend of Korra, on the other hand, tells us that this power is just Rava's spirit being activated. In a world with magical spirits and flying bison, why couldn't we also just have humans that could bend the elements? Why did there need to be a backstory to all this? One thing I could always appreciate about The Last Airbender was the way it made bending seem like a tool or a weapon instead of a magical ability. Like I explained before, the writers use everything in their arsenal to make bending feel like this. This new backstory not only creates many contradictions, but also just makes bending feel like another magic system. The backstory of the Avatar felt too magical, just like the spirits. The Avatar and bending itself was meant to stay mysterious. It was never meant to be turned into an acid trip. The last major issue I have with the spiritual stuff is the fact that after the kaiju fight between Korra and Unavatu, Korra loses her spiritual connection to all of the past avatars, effectively making her the first avatar in the cycle, and also meaning that any avatars that come in the future can't talk to anyone before her.
Now that you're bonded with Rava once again, are you also reconnected to your past lives?
No. I think that link is gone forever.
I see.
I really don't know how this idea could get through so many people in the production of The Legend of Korra, and they all agreed that it should go into the story. The Avatar essentially has 3 main things that make them special. They can bend all 4 elements, they can enter the Avatar state, and they can talk to all past reincarnations of themselves for guidance. This show decides it's a good idea to remove one of these factors entirely, and now we will never again be able to see Aang, Roku, Kyoshi, or any of the other hundreds of avatars that could have been called upon. I can almost guarantee you that in the next Avatar series, this decision will be retconned in some way. I genuinely don't know what good in the overall story this decision made, or what the writers thought it would make. There are still many issues with The Legend of Korra, but most of them are pretty minor compared to what I talked about here. The series really did have the potential to be something great, but unfortunately fell flat when it came to many writing and production decisions. When thinking about all of the adaptations of Avatar as a whole, I almost feel sorry for anyone who enjoys this franchise. In all 3 titles, The Last Airbender movie, The Last Airbender Netflix show, and The Legend of Korra, everyone, myself included, hoped each time for something that made them feel the same way they did watching the original Last Airbender show. And that being said, there's only one question left to answer. Is there still hope? Short answer, yes. Despite the last 3 installments of the franchise being duds, there have been recent leaks of a new Avatar series that is meant to come apparently in 2025. There are many videos out there already talking on this matter, so I'll just keep it very brief. This new series is said to take place after Korra's time is up, and for some reason, she has to make a decision that saves the world but also destroys it as we know it. There are no more 4 nations, and the world is split up into 7 havens. Oh, and the avatars, yes, you heard that right, avatars, with an S, plural, are twins. Now, there's quite a bit to unpack here, but I believe that if this story is executed correctly, it could be the next big winner. Many people are wary of the whole twin avatar thing, and they're not being 4 nations anymore, but when you think about it, we've already seen pretty much everything the previous Avatar world had to offer. I really like the fact that they're shaking up the status quo here and doing something nobody really expected. People will want to write this series off instantly because of all the other bad installments that the franchise got, but this show really has a chance to reach the heights that The Last Airbender did. I believe it can save the franchise. Okay, I'm sorry. I know that was corny. But if you've watched to this part of the video, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you for watching this far. I worked pretty hard on this video. I like kind of grinded out this entire thing in like a week. So I really hope that you did enjoy. This is like my first try at like the whole video essay thing. I know I kind of sounded like a kid in middle school giving a book report throughout this thing, but I'm normally not like that. I'm normally more energetic, I guess. So hopefully I'll be able to show more of that in my next one if I do make a next one. Depends on how this does. There's like a certain part when you're editing a video, a certain point after like just so long working on it that you don't even know if it's good anymore. Like people that I've showed it to have told me that it's good, so I'm hoping that that's true. But I don't know, they could just be like helping me cope. If you could, while you're here, if you're feeling generous, if you could subscribe, like this video, and honestly, I don't even care about the bell notification. You can skip that one if you want. And support my goal of becoming a full-time YouTuber one day. That's been my dream since I was little. If you've known me for my Rec Room content, things will probably be changing around here. I'm not going to be posting Rec Room stuff anymore. So I'm sorry about that. If you leave, I understand. If you stick around, thank you very much. Oh yeah, the art that's on screen right now, all the fan art was made by lovely people over in Future Server or Future Adjacent people. That's my friend. I've known him for a long time. He's really cool. He's got a YouTube channel. He does art stuff. You should go check him out. Everyone who drew something of me, they're credited. You can see their name. I don't know. I don't have anything else to say. Stay boxy. I don't know. Thanks for watching.